Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world today. Thanks for joining us. We have our presenters here with us on screen. We're going to go ahead and run through just a few slides here. Of course, if this is your first CII webinar, we're going to go ahead and just remind folks that we are here for educational purposes. As you know, CII is your R&D Center for Capital Projects. We're not here to market or lobby or sell anything, so we just always like to remind members the purpose of the webinar is educational, and we will be taking questions to address anything that pops up throughout this. Unfortunately, we can't take your questions live in the session, but if you use your control panel there are some gray bars on your control panel. One of them will say questions. You can use the box with the arrow popping out of it there to expand that panel. You can enter your question there, and we'll gladly take those at the end. If for some reason we run long and we don't get to your question, we will certainly send you an email and respond to you that way. And if you know CII, you know we have a big party every summer. It is our annual conference. It's where our brilliant research teams take the stage to present their findings. They are available after their presentations to speak with you and take questions. If you've not been to conference, we invite you to join us. If you are not a member, we invite you to join us and check us out. This is the best way to learn more about CII. If you click on that or hover over that QR code, it'll take you to the CII website with more registration information. Hope to see you in Nashville at the end of the month, July 28th through 30th. And thank you for all of you who have already registered. We look forward to seeing you there. So at CII, our culture is based on safety. Everything we do is with the mission of improving safety. So we like to start, of course, with safety moments, and this is probably one of the most basic reminders that we all need with regularity. I myself am guilty of this. I'm reminded by colleagues. It actually even sent me to the eye doctor. It turns out I needed glasses, which is one of the reasons I was sitting so poorly. So often good to just sit all the way back, ergonomically correct, with your back to the back of the chair. Make sure you're in the proper sit position with your feet flat on the ground, head up, and it's much better on your entire body, your neck, your eyes, not to be glaring over like a turtle, as my colleagues like to catch me doing. I know this was, I believe, Kristen's safety moment. So if there's anything you guys would like to add to this specific to webinar engagement, feel free to chime in here.
Well, I think it's good that they're wearing pants in this, you know.
We would certainly agree with that.
I digress, sorry.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, so quick look at our agenda today. We're gonna, of course, the presenters will introduce themselves. We'll go over the objectives. The whole goal here is to educate you guys about this opportunity to engage in CII research. So each section will break down exactly what that's all about. And without further ado, our presenters today will tell you more about the time commitments, what it's like to be a part of research, what the process looks like, and other considerations. So I will ask our presenters to please introduce themselves to you, and we will get going with our presentation today.
Well, maybe I'll start off, but I'll have everybody else introduce themselves. Can Mark introduce themselves? I think we just went through, and that's probably not right. So we got.
I don't think so.
No, okay. Well, we welcome you, Mark. I think you're on, but he was having troubles getting on as a presenter. But Mark is going to be joining us from Arizona State. So maybe we'll go from right to left on the screen, and then I'll introduce myself last. Shiva?
Okay, so I'm gonna start. So my name is Shiva Pulatan. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Sustainable Engineering and the Built Environment at Arizona State University, and my research focuses on planning, risk analysis, and safety. And I'm so glad to be here today. Thank you.
Great.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Parrish. I am also a professor in the School of Sustainable Engineering and the Built Environment at Arizona State. And this is my 13th year being engaged with CII, and this will be my 6th research team. So really excited to try to recruit a few new members and teach you all something in the process. Those of you that are not here to become members, that's a bummer for us, but we are going to try to make sure that you still walk away with something useful for giving us an hour of your time.
Great. Steve Cabano. I am not with Arizona State, probably the only one here, but I do represent a company called Pathfinder, and we are a CII member. We're a project management consulting firm. We're based out of New Jersey, but we have offices in Houston and Calgary and some other locations. So I've also been involved with CII for many years. I was the chair of CII right before the pandemic, I think. I don't remember the exact year. But I've been involved in a number of different research teams and committees and so on. So look forward to kind of chairing the effort here. So that's our team. So why are we here, right? So I think the main focus is to introduce attendees to the to what the research team is targeted to. You know, when we look at trying to bring value to you know, our member companies, you know, a big part of it is you know, through research. Now value can be measured in a lot of different ways, right? Jenny talked about safety being kind of the #1 driver. So a lot of the research was based on safety. But it's also, you know, how do we plan and execute projects as efficiently as possible? So that we'll talk about what some of the goals of the research team are, especially from, I'll call it an owner perspective, but how the contractors and vendors and suppliers can also gain value through that. We're also going to talk about how we're going to integrate into work that's already been done, right? So, you know, things like alignment and front-end planning and those types of things also become part of this, you know, the focus that we're going to have on this research team. And then ultimately, and maybe shamelessly, is to try to get folks to join us. We've got roughly, I think, I don't know, 11, 12 different organizations participating already, but we would love to recruit a few more, and we'll talk about the process and the commitment and so on as we move ahead. So what are we focused on? What's the opportunity? So if you kind of take a look at this cartoon, you know, this is, although it is a cartoon and we're kind of doing this in jest, but there's reality here, right? You know, when you sit on the left-hand side and, you know, owner organizations are trying to drive a business, you know, where do they make money? They typically make money not on the project itself as an owner, but they make money on the completed asset, right? So whatever industry you might be in, whether it's oil and gas or power or consumer products or, you know, whatever, you know, ultimately we spend capital to create assets that produce products that hopefully, you know, we make money in the markets that we serve. When you look on the project side, we talk about the right side of this. You know, we as a project manager, and that's my background. I'm a mechanical engineer, but also a project manager. You know, my most important aspect is to get that project done based on the commitment that we made to our, you know, to either our client or our management and so on. So, you know, our #1 driver is let's get that project done safely, right? To the scope and quality that has been defined. Let's do it on time. And obviously we want to try to do it at the least amount of money that it takes to actually meet all of those objectives. So when you think about getting these two folks together, right? These two sides of the chasm there, you know, often we're not aligned, right? On the owner side, we make the assumption that the project team understands what the business drivers are, what's important from a business standpoint, you know, where those levers are that you might want to pull based on what's more important. Execution schedule, I want to get that product to the market as fast as possible and things like that. Or is it lowest capital cost? Or is it operability, maintainability, kind of the most efficient to operate and so on. If we don't communicate that well, those train tracks there that you see, or the bridge between the two sides, is not really well defined. And the project team, although they think that they're executing to a well-established set of objectives, may be misaligned with what the business is looking for, right? So what we are trying to do is to create kind of a set of guardrails, right, that is defined by the business, that this is what the business is willing to pay for today versus what it might be willing to pay for in the future, right? Or, the value proposition of that asset. So I'll just give you a great example of this, right? So, let's say we're building or designing a project and putting the plannings together for a capital project. And there are potential opportunities to expand that project in the future, right? But, we're going to execute to the base scope of work today. Now, if you hand that over to engineering would say, it might be good to put some provisions in that design today to make it more efficient to expand in the future. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, right? It's a perfect engineering viewpoint. But typically, if you do that, you're gonna spend more money and maybe even take a little more time to get that initial project done, with the idea that you'll save some money down the line to build the future projects and build the expansion and so on. But if that business unit, if that owner only has a certain amount of money today, or only has a certain amount of time, and they have to get that first, project A done on time and within budget, then even though it's the right engineering solution to build some provisions in today, maybe it's just not the right time to do that. And recognizing that it may cost more later on, but if I don't have the money to do this today, I don't have the opportunity to expand later on because I couldn't even get the first project done. It just was, out of budget or whatever it happens to be. So we don't want engineers to make these decisions, right? These have to be decisions that are based on what the business direction is, what the senior management and so on and so forth. The engineering side can give options and say, well, if we go this route, it costs X. If we go this route, it costs Y. But ultimately, the decision has to be on the end user, on the people that are paying the money. So there's the gist of what we're trying to get to here, is how do we connect the business direction with the engineering or the project team to make sure that we don't start charging down the work process, our front end planning, with an engineered solution that is not aligned with what the business direction is. And the other thing I'll mention here just before we jump is that some of those business directions are changing, right? So if you think about capital cost, yeah, I mean, we all think capital cost is critically important, right? But so is schedule today, right? Most projects today are more schedule driven than they are cost driven for whatever reason. It could be regulatory compliance, it could be market penetration, or whatever the justification for the project is. But we also have a lot of ESG drivers, right? Environmental, social governance type requirements. And if we don't know the direction of the organization, we may be making some technical decisions on the engineering side that are not aligned with some of those ESG goals as well, right? So that's what we're trying to do, is just to better have that communication, kind of lock down that business case, if you want. And then as we progress through the various phases of front-end planning, we'll have a basis to make those decisions against, right? And that's kind of the justification for where we're headed here. Okay, so what are some of the questions that that we have here? This communication between kind of the business and our execution teams, or our engineering and construction type resources. How does that work? There's probably a lot of different methodologies here, but what we're trying to do is to make sure at least something is being done to build the walkway or the train tracks that you saw on the previous slide. That's what we're trying to create, is that there is some kind of a communication, documentation, a tool maybe that allows us to have that connection between the business and the execution teams. You know, from a project delivery standpoint, right? What we're ultimately trying to do is to minimize late changes on a project where we were headed down a certain path, and then the next thing you know, we get the stakeholders involved and that maybe were not involved early and they're saying, well, wait a minute, that's not what our expectations were. That's, you know, shame on us from a project execution team or planning team that we didn't have better alignment. Now, there are probably a number of different ways that owner organizations are assuring that this alignment is happening. But what we want to do is be able to provide some research-driven type recommendations and ultimately possibly a tool that allows us to make sure that there's a connection here between the business and engineering. Which gets to the last point here, which is all about communication, right? That, you know, we think we might be talking to each other, but if we don't document it, if we don't kind of, I'll call it sign off, and maybe it's not a literal sign off, but agree that we have this alignment between the two parties, that we won't have the potential for any kind of misalignment as we proceed through the process. So those are some of the high level questions. The only other thing that I would mention here is, and I think it's it might be the next slide or so, but it's not a one and done, right? Because we live in a world that changes, and it changes more rapidly now than probably ever before, right? So your business case, the owner business case may change, right? So although we're talking about putting an assessment together very early on in the project, this may be something that you're reevaluating in every phase of work, right? To make sure that the business direction is still the same, that the environment hasn't changed in which, this either the project or the business is headed. So yeah, I mean, things can, change in a heartbeat. And your project may have to deal with that accordingly, but at least then for whatever changes that we're implementing at that point, we're aligned between the business change that the organization sees and maybe the business direction, and that engineering then reacts accordingly. They're not reacting without something else driving it from a business standpoint. So that's kind of where those are some of the questions. All right, so previous work and available tools, I'm going to hand this off, actually, I think.
Yes. All right. Thanks so much, Steve. So as Steve was mentioning, a lot of what we see in industry right now, and we've continued to see for quite some time at CII, is that there's a pretty fundamental disconnect between the business drivers for why you're executing a project and then maybe what gets translated or understood by the time that the engineering and construction teams take it over. And part of that might result from the fact that the business folks see, as Steve mentioned, that the project is a means to have an asset to deliver something else, whereas the construction company, the engineering company, the architects, some of the service providers, they might see that project as the end in itself, right? That is how they are making money. And so that therein probably creates some of this disconnect that we're seeing. And this was something recognized by CII a long time ago. In the 100 level research teams, we're now at research team 435. So this was many moons ago when we were in research team 113. But they looked at what was happening with alignment during the pre-project planning, which we now refer to as front-end planning phase, and recognized that if you didn't have alignment between team members, it was going to result in a poorer project. So they've developed here, and this is the part where those of you that are spending time with us that for whatever reason decide, I'm not able to commit to the research team, which we hope you all do, but if you can't, this is a way that hopefully at least you're able to take something back. So they identified factors that help determine early on in a project whether or not a team is aligned, and then we're able to create an alignment thermometer, which some of you might be familiar with. where you're looking at your score and figuring out how likely are we to be successful. And through looking backwards at projects that were previously completed, they were actually able to find a correlation between teams that were up in that comfortable road to success space and their project outcomes. They're on the capital project side. So better cost performance, better schedule performance, et cetera. So this is one of the earliest examples of CII really getting involved in the alignment space. And those of you that are members, you obviously have this available to you on the knowledge base. If you're not, this is available to purchase on the knowledge base if you'd like to learn more or consider using this alignment tool in your own organizations. Next slide. So this one's a little tricky because it does build, so I'll let our operator know when it's time to click again. But more recently, Research Team 394 looked at improving capital efficiency, and their work really concluded that capital effectiveness and capital efficiency at the organization, portfolio, and project levels are all critical. And so they developed a structured and integrated portfolio management process. If you click again, we'll see that. There we go. Okay, perfect. So this is the portfolio management process that Team 394 came up with. And you can see that they have various inputs coming from lots of groups, particularly the corporate management side, really figuring out, okay, what assets do we need to deliver on our business? And then that is helping to understand, you know, how well are these various assets performing at any given time? Do they need to be updated? Do we need to make adaptations? Do we need to add? Do we need to shrink? All of those things were coming into this portfolio management. The team recognized that large projects and small were fundamentally different. I think that's a theme that CII has explored many times over. And then, you know, when do we keep our project going? When do we decide we need to push this project off? And how is that all going to work? I want to be clear that while this is foundational and helpful for us in understanding as we think about front-end planning and business objectives and how those come together, our project will not be a portfolio management. We are looking at, once you have decided, yes, I am definitely doing this project, how do we make sure that the project is continuing to serve the business needs, which to Steve's point earlier, might be evolving, or the market conditions might be changing in ways that impact the project. And so that's really what we're driving at, is how do we keep making sure that our project is meeting that business objective?
Yeah, just one thing here, Kristen, on this. So I sat on this team as well. You know, there were two aspects here. It's capital efficiency and capital effectiveness. You know, capital efficiency is, you know, how do we execute projects better? How can we be more efficient in delivering that asset? Capital effectiveness was really about, you know, are we choosing the right projects? Are we spending our capital effectively? And, you know, owners have to deal with this all the time. They typically have more projects than they have capital. So you have to make a choice of which ones kind of support your business case in you know, in a better alignment, right? So the tool or the process and the research that we'll be doing will be looking at, once we've decided on a specific project, let's make sure that we're still aligned with what those business directions are.
Yeah, absolutely. And then more recently, the downstream and chemicals group created a project capital efficiency scorecard. And this is a tool that you can use to actually look at how are we doing at efficiently using our capital. So this is probably the most closely related to what it is that we're actually going to be producing. But again, this was really focused on, are you using that capital efficiently, and less about, are you remaining in alignment with your business objectives, and do you have a process in place to recalibrate if required? And I think a lot of us are familiar with projects where we have to recalibrate in the middle because something has gone awry or a condition has really changed pretty significantly. But even if that's not the case, right, we still want to make sure that at the end of the day, all of the people that were involved with the project, including the end users and the people that approved using the capital, feel like the project was a success and has delivered on the drivers. So this project capital efficiency scorecard considers 125 different factors that all help you figure out if you're going to be using your capital efficiently. And then that has distilled it down into the 4 different groups that you can see here on the screen. You get a score for each of those that allows you to see where you're maybe having opportunities for improvement related to making sure that you are using your capital efficiently. So are you not getting your strategic plans done? And is that why you feel like you're not using your capital efficiently? Or is it something about your contracting strategy that's coming much further downstream that's causing you to have some capital or some inefficiencies with how you use your capital? So this is another great tool that was, again, created. And you can see that you move from across these categories, you get individual scores, but then you'll get an overall score as well. And that's something that CII has found is a really helpful way of thinking about tools and scoring. So this harkens to a lot of other tools that CII has used. I'm going to turn it back over to Steve, who's going to talk to you guys about the Beam tool.
Okay, so not recognizing who all is in on the call here, but so there are some industry examples of building this agreement or this alignment between the business unit and the and engineering. So IPA, if most of you hopefully are familiar with IPA, but they're an industry benchmarking company for projects. So what they evaluate is, are we, is a project and or an organization meeting its business objectives? So how are you in cost efficiency? How are you in schedule efficiency? Things like that, right? So one of the things that they've benchmarked throughout the capital project industry was that there was a misalignment between owner organizations, business folks, and the people that were actually doing the projects. So they are now benchmarking the utilization of what they call a business engineering alignment meeting. And it goes through various sets of criteria. So related to what I talked about before, future expansion, right? Does the organization plan for future expansion of the asset that they're originally designing? And you rate yourself, is it the low cost option would be no investment for future expansion, all the way to the highest option would be, yeah, we're going to put whatever we can to make future expansion as easy as possible. It could be other factors. There's roughly, 15 to 20 different criteria that you're looking at. How much automation do you want to put into play? What's the reliability philosophy? Is it okay if we meet 90% reliability, or do we need 99.9% reliability? What does that do? Well, inline spares, as an example. Do I put 2 pumps into the design because I need as close to 100% reliability as possible, but that's going to cost me money, right? To have two pumps into the design rather than 1. Or if we have a maintenance philosophy where we're going to shut the facility down to do heavy maintenance every 6 months, 9 months, then maybe 1 pump is fine, and then we'll just ratchet up our maintenance on that pump, reducing the capital cost, but recognizing that our maintainability is going to deal with the maintenance work on that pump. I'll use an example of the industry. You think about an aircraft, right? An airplane. Most aircraft, at least commercial aircraft, have triple redundancy, right? So one system fails, another one kicks in. If that system fails, another one kicks in. Very, very expensive for aircraft to have triple redundant systems. But why do we do it, right? Well, what's the most important driver there? It's people's lives, right? So would you fly in an aircraft that only had single redundancy or no redundancy, just a single system? Probably not, right? You're just not going to feel as confident. So those are kind of the business drivers that the Beam kind of tries to get us aligned in. What is the reliability requirements? What's our maintenance philosophy? And what this will do when you go through this is put some pressure on the business. So a lot of times the business doesn't feel comfortable necessarily in going through this, but you're asking them to make these decisions because you don't want a bunch of rework later on in your capital project by having the misalignment. So those guardrails that I was talking about before, by going through a beam type environment, and we will build in to our research, what's already in the beam. Is it covering the right things? Should it be expanded? Should it be shrunk, right? And how long should a beam workshop take, right? And things along those lines. What level of project, size, complexity should a beam be utilized, or something like a beam be utilized? So that's how we'll integrate some industry, existing industry knowledge and data. All right, so some considerations here. So, ultimately, what we found through CII is people love tools, right? It's, whether it's the idea that you have a checklist to follow, or, something that at least triggers your thought. We like calling them think lists rather than checklists, but it gets the kind of the juices flowing on whatever that topic happens to be. So ultimately, we're trying to think, or we're thinking down the lines that, when we get into this business engineering alignment, that there will be some sort of a tool that will be developed, right? Easy to use. Again, one of these workshops should typically not last any longer than half a day, right? For a fairly complex type project. Then, and what we mentioned before, that it's something, because it's short and to the point, it may be utilized multiple times to just make sure that we're still in alignment with any changes that may have happened in the business, right? And does our project need to adjust accordingly? But it would be built into the front end planning process, right? That it's not something that's outside of that or anything. It is an integral part, because our project teams almost need to feel like they're flying blind, right? Or they're naked without the beam, because they're making decisions without justification in a lot of cases, right? They're making decisions on what they think is the best engineering solution, but it may not be aligned with what the business is looking for. So again, maybe use multiple times to kind of make sure that we're continuously just, as the project evolves through the front end planning process and stages, that we're still aligned with what the business direction is. So that's one. So how, and we noticed that some people have already signed up for the team that may not be on the owner side, right? So what's the value proposition there, right? Well, ultimately, we're trying to make the whole process as efficient as possible, right? So in reality, I was going to say in theory, but in reality, a contractor, let's say it's a front end contractor doing the engineering work, right? They should be asking the same questions. If they're relying on they're reacting to the owner request to do a design, some of the things that are going to be established in this beam should be questions that the contractor is asking. Should we design for future expansion? Should we design for a certain level of reliability? And if they're not given that in the request for proposal, or the kind of the initial kind of setup of the engineering side of things, then they need to be asking the same questions, right? So going through this process, they should be engaged on what can make them more efficient. And we make sure that the tool eventually has those questions answered in the tool. And the same thing would happen on the vendor and supplier side, that if you're providing a piece of equipment, to what level of robustness are we choosing that piece of equipment? Should it last for 3 years, or should it last for 30 years? Are we asking the right questions that then we can feed the suppliers and vendors, the correct information, so that the entirety of the project, the owner, contractor, vendor, supplier, all become more efficient because we're aligned on what the owner is willing to pay for up front, right? So that's kind of the second proposition, if you want. So from an owner standpoint, a business unit within an owner standpoint, what we're trying to do is to improve on that capital efficiency, right? Now you see effectiveness in here. So some of this may even get into the point where, there's roughly, if you follow the front end process, there's 3 phases before you get the full project funding. So there's decisions. There's 3 decision points at the end of those gates, the gated process. So they are evaluating that portfolio at each of those stopping points. as we define the project, if the owner has defined a certain level of quality, robustness, capability, so on, but as you go through these phases, we find out, maybe it doesn't meet a certain hurdle rate. Maybe it doesn't meet a certain financial calculation that we're looking for. Well, then we have to reevaluate, right? Does this project still make sense? If not, then maybe we do cancel it or postpone it. Or are we asking for too much up front, which may change the beam and say we want a lower class, but just it's a lower capital cost class because we're going to adjust some other things, downstream of it to make it a better business case for the owner. So by applying the tool, we'll make sure that the business managers, right, within owner organizations are getting what they want and willing to pay for, but also that they're making better selections on what gets into the portfolio or not. All right. So the kind of that connection, hopefully, right, between the business side of the business, which is on the left-hand side here, and the execution team. When I say execution team, that means our engineers, contractors, suppliers, so on and so forth. Hopefully our output, right, whatever that ends up looking like and feeling like, and whether it's a tool or some other work practice, that will be able to create a much more stable connection between the business and the execution team. That's the ultimate goal within the tool development. We'll call it a tool development. All right. So I'm going to hand it back off to, I think Kristen here is going to talk about kind of the research process and what's kind of expectation if you're joining as a team member.
Sure. So yes, the research process, this is from Daniel Oliveira, who is CII's research director. And just wanted to walk you through, typically a CII project is 8 quarters or 2 years long. We're going to be a little shorter than that because we are not kicking off until, I just realized I wrote 8/29, but it's actually the 26th. So we're not going to ask you to come to do a kickoff meeting on a Saturday, not to worry. So we'll be doing our kickoff meeting earlier in that same week. And then we will report out in 2027 at the annual conference. So Jenny mentioned at the beginning that we have a conference at the end of July in Nashville. We will also have a conference probably in mid to late July in 2027. Not entirely sure where that's going to be. They always keep a lid on it until it gets a little closer. But that's where we'll be presenting out. So we'll have between this August and July of 2027 to really start to understand what exactly belongs in this tool or this process, this output that Steve just illustrated. So we'll spend about till the end of the year, maybe early into 2026, figuring that out, right? Exactly what belongs in what we're doing. How are we going to collect the data required? How are we going to make sure that whatever we provide is useful? That's what we're going to spend the first probably 5 months of our time together doing. And then we're going to move into actually starting to conduct the research, collect the data, develop the tool, refine the tool, keep making sure that whatever it is that we've created is actually providing value. And so we're going to look at some time to validate what it is that we've created. And then towards the end of the project, again, probably around March of 2027 into July of 2027, we're going to be spending a lot more of our time thinking about how we package this and explain it to an audience at a CII annual conference, and how we create products that other people can pick up off of the CII knowledge base, which is kind of our virtual bookshelf, pick it up and understand how to use it so that within their own organizations through CII, and if you're not a member, if this is a tool that is really important to you, you could purchase it outside of being a member. How is this providing value? How are we making sure that the research that we've done has been packaged up in a way that people are actually able to pick it up and use it? So that's really what our process looks like. Obviously, we've thought about what we need, right? Steve's done a really good job of already expressing that to all of you, but now we're starting to look at, okay, how are we going to deliver on that need? And is there anything that, just because this is how we've thought of it, are there any other pieces that are missing? And that's why we need a full research team with more perspectives. So if we can move on to the next slide, I'm going to have Steve, because he's going to be our research chair, actually do the call to action, because I think it's a little more powerful when it's industry to industry. So Steve, take it away.
Yeah, and so, just from a standpoint of, why we need additional resources, right? And I think, all of us have been kind of conveying it up to now. We want to get different perspectives, right? Even from different industries. We may have to make a choice on whether there's one tool here or there's an adaptation for, process industry or heavy industrial versus commercial buildings or whatever. And we need the input to be able to ask the right questions to see if one tool's enough, or maybe there's, adaptations to it that kind of like the PDRI, right? The PDRI has industrial and infrastructure and buildings and mining and so on and so forth. It may have to end up in something like that, or maybe not. Maybe there's enough business related questions that make sense here. But we need input. We don't want to make those decisions ourselves. We want to have input from, various industry representatives to do that. So we need participation. Typically this is, there's, roughly, a meeting a month. We're trying to get maybe 4 meetings that are face-to-face. But all the rest would be virtual. We do believe that the face-to-face meetings actually provide probably 2 to 3 times as much value as a virtual. And that's why we want to try to get them as often as possible. So, there's in the overall kind of meeting space there over a 2-year period, that would be the commitment, what you're seeing on the screen here, 12 one-hour meetings along, a given year. We try to respect, holidays and vacation time and all that kind of stuff as far as the planning for the actual meeting events. The academic leads, they've got a very, very well-structured process that we follow of data collection, looking at a lot of that past information that was done through CII and elsewhere, input from the team, input from non-team members, right? We'll be doing, whether that's through a survey or something like that, creating some kind of an end result of all this, and then testing it, through the process. And that 2-year window that we looked at, that's what's going on in that case. So we've got some good representation already that is signed up on the team. Folks that are coming from, Chevron and Exxon, and I can't remember all of the other member organizations that are participating. We do have some suppliers and contractors that are also involved, in the 10 to 12 list that we have. But we know that there are some folks that have shown interest to be able to join us, whether they're folks like, OPG or Air Products and people like that. I'm, kind of don't have the complete list in front of us. But we'd love to get you involved, right? Because just having that cross section of industry representatives would be awesome. I look at this as the essence of the tool works for any project in any industry. It actually works for any size project as well. It may just not be as robust for a small project, but just to get that alignment on the end user, who's paying the bill, and the people that are actually doing the work, you can't argue that there's not value there. So, we just want to make sure that we're covering that full spectrum. So we want to get obviously CII members engaged in the team, right? So there's a QR code there that allows you to kind of get, if you are interested in participating in the team. It's Christy Delaney. You see her email address. I think that actually that QR code would link right to joining. If you're not a CII member, and there may be some of the 40 or 50 or so people that are listening right now, but this is also being recorded, and there were over, I forget how many people that were interested in attending. Even if you're not a member, you can participate in kind of the data collection and the testing part of this, right? So you can also be part of the process. As I mentioned, when I sat on the front end planning team for the PDRI, and we had probably roughly 30 people on the team, but we reached out to over 50 different companies to bring data. It was even more than that, I think, but bring data into the testing process and so on. So if you're not a CII member, ultimately become a CII member. That would be awesome. But if not, you can at least participate in the research through these other means. So that would be awesome. I've been a member of CII now, and our company's been a member for probably close to 30 years. And the real value proposition here is engaging in research that means something to you, right? It not only helps you in molding what that tool ultimately would look like, but also you create, you're working with like-minded people. You create relationships that you can always use for the rest of, your career in reaching out to just get some information in the industry or so on. But there's a true value to have either you or some of your colleagues in your organization get involved in any of these researches. So we hope that we can engage you in helping out, support the team. And I think we're at the question session now, right? Yep. So I don't know if there are any questions, Jenny, or.
Yes, we do have a question. This sounds familiar to a concept called framing. Can you expand on that? How is this similar or how is this different?
Sure, maybe I'll take that one. So it is very similar, right? There are many organizations out there that have different front-end processes, and they may call it different things, right? So it might be framing. Some people call it, there's a scouting process that looks for opportunities, and then you define those opportunities a little bit further. There's the beam that we went through from a CII or a IPA standpoint. So whatever you call it, right? It's first of all, does your organization have the process? And if it doesn't have the process, do you see value in the process? If you do have the process, can it be tweaked? Can it be updated? Are we asking the right questions? Are we getting the alignment that we're looking for? So again, kind of sharing some of that information that everybody's using is part of this this research effort. And if you have an established framing process, sharing that with what other people might be using as a beam approach or some other methodology, that's what we're going to try to kind of consolidate into something that we can all kind of get aligned around.
Wonderful. Do you all have any other questions? We still have a few moments left. If you'd like to type them into the question panel, we'll gladly address those. We do have a couple of notes for the team. We'll just set those aside. It's from another member who's been active in Teams, and she just had some notes for us. Otherwise, I think we may be complete here on questions. Okay. I think we will add, perhaps we could add, Steve, when you were on that last slide, I was just thinking about the wonderful professional development opportunities that exist through being a part of a research team as well. If you all out there as leaders have somebody that you might want to invest in their professional development, being a part, committing to the research team and being a part of that experience is something we hear from our members with regularity, that it was a monumental experience in their career for growth. So that's kind of another added bonus, as well as access to a tool first. You can pilot these tools on your own projects and be first to market with them before they even hit the conference stage. So that's yet another benefit.
We talked about the ultimate, end game here might be a tool. A tool would be great, but it's how do you apply the tool, right? So I do see that something that kind of follows this effort would be, something that would get into the training end of things or professional development end of things, where a short either orientation or training program about the purpose of the beam, how this research kind of ended up as far as the details that are included in the tool, and then how you would actually facilitate a workshop may be something that CII offers after this research is done.
Great idea. Well, it feels like we are not going to get any more questions, so I will just throw out that if you are at all on the fence This will be a wonderful team to join. Dr. Parrish is a pro at CII Research. She makes it fun. This will be an amazing experience. Steve has, as you can tell, quite a bit of experience leading CII research teams. He knows his way around, and you guys will be in good hands. If you're looking for a smooth ride that will be fun, this is going to be a good one to sign up for.
Yeah.
So with that, I will thank you all for joining us today. I'll thank our presenters, and we will give you 10 minutes back in your day.
Thanks, everybody.